Okay, good evening, everyone. Going to call the Planning Commission meeting to order. It is Monday, April 7th at 6 o'clock. The roll call, Steve.
Here.
Josh. Here. Mike.
Here.
And we're waiting on John and Kate and Bailey are excused. The first item on the agenda is to approve the Planning Commission minutes for March 3rd.
Make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the Planning Commission minutes from March. Is there any discussion on the motion? Not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next item on the agenda is public hearing for Amendment 635-125, procedure for changes or amendments, and 635-126, protest. Entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to approve opening the public hearing.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion second to open public hearing. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Matt?
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor. So the Wisconsin State Assembly enacted a new requirement that we can no longer, or communities across the state can no longer require a 2/3 majority when considering certain ordinance changes and enacting them, or a supermajority as they would call it. Now it's just by a simple majority. So basically, as part of what's before you tonight are amendments to section 635-125 and 126 that just changes that supermajority to a simple majority of 50%. And since it is a zoning code amendment, we are required to hold a public hearing. That is why it is something that we're having the public hearing before you tonight, even though it is a rather simple or somewhat
That's the
minor
only change, that's the only changes on this, man?
Yep, between these two is just changing it from a supermajority to a simple majority.
Anybody have any questions? Any close public hearing?
Make a motion to close public hearing.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So, do we need a motion to send that to council for approval?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to move the amendments, procedure changes 635, 125, and 126 to council for approval. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next item on the agenda is comprehensive plan updates. First one's Chapter 2, issues and opportunities. Matt, you want to take that?
Yes, thank you, Bear. So this will be our first month that we're kicking off our comprehensive plan update. Before in your packet, the memo lines out what was already approved. So this meeting will be going issues and opportunities, natural, cultural, and agricultural resources. Josh is here with us with Cedar Corporation. He'll be walking us through those two chapters here in a second. But included in your chapter is the 4, or I should say 6 relevant questions that we have in the survey. Now, the survey isn't officially closed yet till this Saturday, but we wanted to include what we had up until at least last Thursday, which was a little over 130 responses. I just did actually check as Josh and I were talking, we're up to 160 right now, so there are some that will be included, and as we go through these chapters, we'll be sharing with you all those results as well. So just to go over the ones that pertain to these two chapters, the first question was, should the city of Prescott increase our efforts to protect sensitive natural resource areas such as wetlands, floodplains, woodlands, stream corridors, and critical wildlife habitat? And then the vast majority, 40, I should really grab my packet so that's hard to read, or I could just zoom in. About 49% said yes, that we should, followed by agree as the second most common answer at 31.69%. And if you have questions as I'm going through this. Yes. If you have questions as we're going through this, let me know and I can stop. The next question then was, what type of cultural resources are most valuable to you? And this was a multiple choice, so you could pick more than one. Historic preservation was the highest, or I should say community events was the highest at 73%. 104 people said those are important to them, followed by historic preservation at 53% said that was important, and then public art 47, and then other 10. And then what concerns, if any, do you have about agricultural land use in the community? I would say the overwhelming response was first runoff and pollution, specifically from nitrates and fertilizers that are being used in surrounding areas. It could be, quite honestly, affecting our water supply, as we're seeing that with well 3 and a higher nitrate level. And then the other big, other secondary answer was just the idea of protecting agricultural land and making sure we preserve it as a resource for us and our surrounding community. Then the next question was, how do you feel about the current quantity and condition of our trees in your neighborhood, parks, along city streets? 42 people, or 29.58%, were neutral on it. The next closest was then somewhat dissatisfied at 25.35%. 36 people, and then somewhat satisfied was the third answer at 23.94%, or 34 people. I won't go through all of them, but the comments basically echo some of the discussion we've already had. The initiative to try to do more tree plantings, as we've done street projects such as Elm and Locust Street. We've been taking trees out of those areas. Obviously, as we're reconstructing, those fully developed trees have cut them down, either whether they're dead or alive, and then how are we replacing them, or in this case, not replacing them. And then as well as the emerald ash borer that we're dealing with in large parts all over the city of taking those down. And then finally, the sixth question is, if you have additional comments regarding agriculture, natural, and cultural resources, please provide them below. Again, this gets a lot into the trees and the desire to try to increase plantings of trees throughout the community. Connecting trails, trying to create a trail system in the town, trees, create more native landscaped areas. And I think that kind of covers most of it. A couple comments here. This one comments specifically about trying to improve our boat launch, which is something we'll be doing with the phase 2 of our riverfront project. And then the final one touches upon the idea of having more landscaped areas, community garden. So with that, I'll turn over to you. Have comments or questions before we jump into chapter 2 and 3?
I got a comment.
Yep.
I don't know who it was, one of us here on the planning commission, well, maybe it was me, brought up that, with the trees, the tree replacement, and trying to, and I think it was when we were talking about capital projects, or we were going into trying to figure out what we wanted to dedicate some resources to. Has there been a lot of open-ended questions has there been a lot of input from the survey respondents on that? I mean, you got some examples of what was said here,
Right.
but it just looks like it's a concern of the citizens that are at least answering the questionnaire. There was a lot of responses on trees, and we really don't have anything going forward on that. We decided not to do anything, if you remember right.
Yeah, but I remember after it was you, and afterwards I was driving through the city one day and I'm looking, I'm like my neighborhood, everybody's got different types of trees.
Right.
But yeah, you get over around this area and then you're like, every tree needs to get cut
Some of
down.
those older parks are really getting decimated.
Well, and then there's just like, the ash trees everywhere.
Yeah. I think, I don't know how it is on the council. Was there more discussion on the council about that, or was there anything about that at the council level? Because I know, like, not to mention any names, but I know there are some people there that are pretty concerned about, us not replenishing those trees that are coming down, either through the street projects or through the ash borer, I just think it's something that we should revisit. I really think if we want to brand ourselves as a city that cares about its natural resources and how things look, shade, as far as keeping things cool, I really think we should dedicate some resources toward replenishing with the trees, and then we'll have to figure out a way to keep them watered. That's the other thing. There was some comments in here about having the bag system like they have across the river on those trees that they planted over there. I think that'd be a good thing. I think there's a lot of citizens that would help us with that.
I think a lot of citizens would too.
I really
So-
do. I just think it has to be something that comes, we have to formulate a plan in order to do that. And it's gonna cost a little bit of money and some resources at the city level, but I really think we need to do that. We made efforts at Freedom Park to keep the trees. That was noted in here as far as how good the trees look there. Wherever there's been areas where trees have been taken care of and they haven't been decimated by the disease, people really do appreciate that. I think we should be mindful of that in the future when we're talking about how we want to dedicate city resources.
And then
Just a comment.
expound on that a little bit. Need to research trees that are lesser susceptible to disease prone. I mean, like, we used to have elm trees here, and they went by the wayside, and they replenished them with ash trees. Now and oaks have oak wilt, and kind of seems like maples and basswood and stuff like that. They're very nice trees. That could be something, that we need to really look at before we just start buying trees.
Well, I'm sure there's some people that could educate us on that a bit. And then the other thing is to mix it up.
Yeah, mix it up.
Just don't replace all
Right.
the elm with ash. And then
Right.
you're faced with the same thing too. But I think it's pretty important for our city to think about replacing those trees. And I think there's enough citizens out there that would help us with that. I really do.
A tree committee.
There's worse things to put together. There's people that are.
I'm just laughing because we had it in our ordinance and we dissolved it because we never had a meeting. But I mean, I
That
will
was
say.
before this Emerald Ash deal though too, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall that the issue first, I think that's dead on. It's just a question of having some sort of consensus of what the plan is and then figuring how we're gonna pay for it.
But we didn't dedicate any resources to it when we had the opportunity. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing the 20/20 hindsight type thing. But anyway, it looks like it was pointed out to us quite a bit in the comments.
Yep, definitely was. All right, I'll turn it over to Josh with Cedar Corporation and then start kind of walking us through the two chapters for tonight.
Thanks, Matt. Good evening. Yeah, it was I think it was a really good discussion on the trees, and that's the chapter 3, the second chapter we'll be talking about tonight. That's where we'll delve into the agricultural, cultural, natural resources. And part of the duty of the commission is to draft this comprehensive plan. And when you identify issues like that, it's important that we incorporate those types of issues and those concerns in this plan. Part of the plan includes a list of goals, objectives, and policies at the end of each chapter, except for the issues and opportunities. But the rest of the chapters, we focus the meat of the plan is really the future land use map, and then the goals, objectives, and policies. And by statute, you only have to be consistent with, the comprehensive plan has to be consistent with your zoning map, your official map, your subdivision ordinance, and then the shoreland and wetland zoning has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. But we deal with a lot of other things besides just those four ordinances. So the law requires that you're consistent with those items, but you still, when you're looking at new development or new committees or new projects, you'll definitely want to open up your comprehensive plan and make sure that you're going to be looking at these things. And that's why we're spending time developing this plan tonight. So throughout the next however many months we've got. But we did have a schedule in there. I want to point out that's kind of an aggressive schedule. And so as we hope to have some good dialogue as part of this process, we may get delayed on some things, but we don't, we want to have this plan adopted. I think the last one was adopted in 2015. Statute requires that you adopt them every 10 years, but we're working on it. So if, let's say, this led into 2026, shouldn't be an issue. We're actively doing the update right now. So we've also done an amendment a couple years ago, and, would that qualify as an update? I don't know, but we've already updated it essentially once to do that bypass route, if you remember, a couple years ago. So onto the issues and opportunities. So it's it's a little bit of a misnomer chapter. It's really looking at the demographics more so than anything, and that's any component in this plan, or the components you'll see in this plan are mostly identified by statute. We can add other things, but there are certain requirements that are required in each statute or each element, and issues and opportunity is one, and most of that is demographics. So when we talk about the survey, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity to come back and revisit this chapter, or at least look at some of the survey results and incorporate them into this chapter. As we're looking at at some of the issues and opportunities. So first of all, the population. If the Department of Administration does the population projections and household projections for the state, that's a resource, but that doesn't mean we have to use those numbers. If you look back at, so they take the census the previous census that has been completed, and do their demographic information and project out population numbers and household numbers. Back in 2010, that information was all done by 2013. We had all that information, and we were able to use that, and we're in 2025, and we still don't have the household projections from the 2020 census. So so we're still we're gonna wait on some of those numbers. One of the next chapters we'll be looking at is housing, but we still will probably want to look back and make sure that we're not completely out of whack with what the DOA projects. We don't necessarily have to use those numbers, but we should be able to look at those numbers and factor those in and see what they are actually.
Any reason why they're so late on that? Getting the data to them?
I don't know. I had an email back in August, and I'm like, we kind of have a backed up queue with comprehensive plans in a number of our communities, and they've been waiting for the census data. And even all the census data hasn't been released yet. It's still slowly rolling out. We have enough to do a plan, but I don't know the exact delay. I mean, COVID, I think, is a reason probably for some of the challenges, but I have no idea why the delay in the DOA projections. Probably it's a result of the delay from the census data being rolling out. So just wanted to point out, so the 2010 numbers were actually very optimistic, I'll say. We didn't hit those numbers. If you look at historical, so table 2.1, here, I'll just try to, we look back at the history from 1970 to 2020. So the numbers that we were projecting, we actually, back in 2010, we were projected to have more than 4,333 people. So those numbers were pretty optimistic. When we look at the new projections from the 2020 census, it actually shows a decline in population by 2050 for the city of Prescott, it's concerning. We see this, and pretty much most of our client communities show a negative population growth in the next 25 years.
Really?
Yeah, and I can't quite figure out. The only one I know, I believe Eau Claire is the one anomaly, like in this west central Wisconsin region, is they show growth, but even like La Crosse shows a reduction. Hudson shows growth, but the rest of the area outside of St. Croix County really shows a decline in population.
Have you seen River Falls lately, what they're doing on the outskirts of River Falls with the housing that they're putting up on?
Yeah, they have a lot of housing. But yeah, so it seems kind of strange to me, and they're focusing on really the population, the birth and death rates. They don't look at in-migration when they're doing those numbers. So our hope or our belief is that the communities this size and similar communities across the state are actually hopefully attracting people, because you can work remotely. You can work. We've got broadband. We've got ways to people can live anywhere and work and make a good living. And Prescott is right on the border of Minnesota, you're not far from the Twin Cities. So I would imagine, I'd be surprised if we look out in 25 years from now and we see a declining population. I just would be pretty shocked at that. And it's hard to plan for a negative growth. We're not really into that. We want to make sure we plan for future development and future growth, and that's what the whole land use plan is. So we have ways of looking at that, of like, okay, maybe we aren't as optimistic as the 2010 census numbers, but we shouldn't be probably as pessimistic as the 2020 census numbers. So maybe we can find a happy medium. And so the numbers that I looked at were, if you look at the next page, just comparing the DOA projections, and all starting in 2020. So the DOA projections from 2010 showed 4,555 people. Well, we didn't quite hit that mark. We're about 222 people below that mark. So those were optimistic. And you look at the 2040 projections, and this is table 2.2. We had 4,980 people projected in 2040. Well, that's probably, we need to add about another 650 people to get to that point in 25 years. Is that doable? It might be, but that's, historically, all of those projections are a little bit aggressive. And so, but then if you look at the DOA 2020 census projections, we peak in 2030 at 4,458 people, and then by 2050 shows a decline to 4,318 people. So that's actually a reduction of people from from the 2020 census. So we'd like to say that there's probably more of a exponential growth, a way to look at it using an exponential growth model, saying, okay, we're going to probably likely see a 1% increase per decade or a 2% increase. And so we just kind of gave a couple options. And we'll probably want to pick one at some point to say, okay, this is what we think, and this is why. I mean, you do have some development pressure from Minnesota. I mean, we've seen some subdivisions happen, and there's business growth, there's industrial growth and stuff. So I think it's reasonable to say, yeah, maybe we're not as optimistic as we were in 2010, but we probably don't want to be showing a negative growth.
So are they coming to that conclusion because of the demographics? Because we've got an older community now?
Yep, I think that's part of it.
But that's it. They're not taking into the account what you just mentioned, business growth.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of micro.
We're right next door to River Falls, and I'm gonna guess that they'd have a hard time saying that they're not growing out there.
Yeah, and I didn't check the River Falls. That's we don't do a lot of, so that could be a growing community. And I think some of the ones that's on the fringe. It's in Pierce and St. Croix County, and so I think there's maybe some growth there. And St. Croix County as a whole, I think, is growing, but even there, I think their demographer at the county level was like, we're going to grow more than what they project. It just seems there's, most of the growth they show Madison and Milwaukee. That's not surprising, but I think there's a lot of growth that's going to happen in communities this size and maybe a little larger. And it just seems shocking to me that they, and maybe the 2020 census was wrong. I don't know. I've been surprised at some of those numbers that they're as low as they have been. We had a pandemic going on, and so I wasn't answering my door back then probably. So if there were people coming to, check on a survey result or a census survey, they wouldn't have gotten mine.
So at some point in the process, are we gonna choose a number that we're gonna go at a growth rate?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll want to, especially as we get to the land use chapter, because the land use chapter, all these chapters kind of build on each other,
Okay.
and so the land use chapter is kind of the really the meat of the plan. When you're going to do any rezoning, that's what you're going to look at, and that's going to be kind of dictates whether or not you rezone something to a different district. Whether it's housing or residential or commercial or industrial, and so at that point you probably will want to have that narrowed down, and maybe 1 or maybe 2% is not the right number. I don't know. I put in some examples here, just so you could see the difference between the different growth rates. And
where we go with the comprehensive plan is dependent on what we put down for a growth rate for population, right?
Well, it helps, and but part of that impact will also be from the number of household projections. So we want to see, because even if population goes down, you still might need households, because what's happening is the people per household is going down. So the number of people in the household are going down. You still need homes, and So even if the population declines, you still may need additional homes from this point. So that's part of the problem is we just don't know that projection number from the DOA. But will it increase a lot when they show a negative projection? I don't know. Probably not a ton. So we got some work to do and some things to figure out, but
I have a question.
Yeah.
We're pretty much out to the edge of our city line as far as what's going to be there for housing growth without annexing and getting these very, very big farmers to part with their land.
Sure.
I mean, we got a river to our immediate west.
yep.
And then farms every direction else you go. So, I mean, is that any of that taken into consideration?
I don't think the DOA factors that in. They're not looking at it on that level. They're looking at just numbers, I think, and just, so I that's what we have to do. I mean, that's our charge is to look at those things. And so if there are areas or pockets where we see growth that are either likely to happen or unlikely to happen, we'll want to make sure when we're mapping that, we say, okay, this, we know this is never going to grow. Well, so both large farms could be a constraint. Obviously, geography or geology, things like that, land formations, we've got the coulees to work through. Some of those things don't lend themselves well for infrastructure expansion, especially at a density that you need for growth. I don't know what the latest.
Can I jump in
Yeah,
for a second?
please.
So, just because we've recently, or I guess I've recently had to look into this a lot because of our public facility needs assessment and some of the things that were questioned when we updated our impact fees. First, since the 2020 came out, the city of Prescott has seen its largest growth in residential housing units since pre-2008. So 2006 was about the year we had a lot of growth. And then since then, it was really kind of stagnant. And then 2021, 2022 saw our highest rates. We had about 40 housing units in 21 and 22. So right now, the DOA is estimating for our community at 4,539 for a population. So if you look at the projections, really with the exception of the exponential growth model at 4,598, we're exceeding pretty much all of these projections right now. One of the things with the DOA projection 2020 census projections they have is they are using county-wide data to try to make the projections and then using those to kind of force them upon municipalities. So a good example is River Falls. As Josh pointed out, St. Croix County, they're predicting it to grow far and beyond. So if you look at River Falls, part of it's in St. Croix and part of it's in Pierce. And for River Falls, the Pierce County estimates, they're showing a decline, and for River Falls in the St. Croix County, they're showing an increase. And they're doing that because they're tying them to the counties and the countywide projections.
Okay.
And that's why, even though a community like River Falls probably going to keep growing, it's not really, doesn't make a lot of sense that they're going to decrease in Pierce County and increase in St. Croix County, but that's the way that they're kind of making these calculations. That's one of the issues with these projection estimates.
Yeah, great point. And so, already, and I've even looked at the state of Wisconsin as a whole, and I forget what it was, but the state of Wisconsin has shown, I think, by 2050 to lose 100,000 people from their 2020 census. Well, since that time, looking at the DOA estimates in 2024, they already showed a growth of 200,000 people. So, I mean, already they're it's way off track. So we've added 200,000 people since 2020, but now we're projecting to lose 300,000 people in 25 years. That seems a lot. So I'm just saying, we need to look at this information. That's what's provided, but there's nothing in statute that requires us to use those projections. So I think it's it's worthwhile to take it in, and it's a good kind of a cautionary tale. Just like in 2010, it was, pretty optimistic, I think. And, but as Matt said, maybe it wasn't as optimistic as things go in cycles. There's slow years sometimes, and then there's, things that pick up. And now, we had some supply chain issues quite a bit right around COVID, but now we're dealing with other political issues, tariffs and other things like that that are unknowns. And so that may slow things down, may ramp things up. We don't know right now.
What's at stake with getting these numbers right? There's a lot of emphasis put on this, getting this number right. I would think we would split the math and, you know, like you did here with the rough estimating, I would think that'd be fine. Is there anything at stake to getting that number right? Do we want it to be high for some reason, or is low bad for some reason? Like to project it, to plan for it to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think it's a good question. I don't think it's bad or good necessarily, but what's at stake is you don't want to cut yourself short of, you know, the future needs of the community because you said, well, we're not going to grow at all. Let's not look outside our boundaries. If we've actually grown to our city limits and the only way to grow is to annex, and you say, well, we're going to lose people, so why even bother looking at that? That would be the shortfall or the short-sightedness of having a low projection. And I think
Sure.
there is room for growth. And so when, you know, you want to have some documentation that when someone does come and annex and you're saying, okay, look, we do show growth, we do believe that there's going to be some growth, this is our justification for annexing or for doing their capital improvements projects and things like that, you know, planning for future growth. So if you didn't plan for future growth, you have that risk of either being landlocked or something else happening where you just don't have the opportunity. So it's not, we're never going to get the numbers right. It's just it's a exercise that we can't do it accurately. But you want to at least get the trajectory right, or at least in the ballpark. So like, let's say we only plan for, 1% growth and it ends up being 5% growth. Is that a problem? It could present some challenges. So you want to be, but I've never seen the numbers play out right in 20 years. It's just, even when I've argued with the DOA on their projections and say, look, your DOA estimates each time are way off from what you projected, so how can we rely on your projections? It's like, well, these are the official numbers we use. So, and I'm not criticizing it, they have a hard job. I mean, it's a lot of work to do all that stuff. But and I don't want to overemphasize that this is we spent probably more time than I intended, but just wanted to show you that this is what the DOA is showing. I don't necessarily think that's what we need to show. I think we need to have some kind of, reasonable expectation and, for growth. So, good discussion. So, onto the household data. Really, the numbers that we have here are really from the 2020 census or 2010 census. We'll be filling this table in once we get the 2020 data. So I've kind of left it blank, but I don't really have a whole lot to add until we see some of those numbers. But probably once we get to the housing chapter, we'll be looking at recent permits and some kind of recent history. I don't know if you guys go through and look at your annual. On an annual basis, what permits have been issued and how much development has happened each year, but sometimes that's kind of fun to see year over year and see what kind of growth has happened. So on to the next, looking at, talked about that. So the age of population, so this, yeah.
Quick question before we move on. In that article, housing data, it says it's going to add 445 additional new homes are forecasted in Prescott by 2040. How could you add 445 homes and then drop by 15 residents in the population forecast? Is that the same data source contradicting itself, or is that?
Number of people per household.
Well, right, but with housing getting so expensive, I imagine it's 2 people per house to afford them. And so you've got 445 times 2. I'm just curious.
No, that's a good question. And it basically is a simple, that's why we want to see the new numbers. So the numbers that we had were from 2010. And that's what I was just kind of doing that quick math. I think I might have done it. I was looking at 440, I think it was people. So it should have been, I need to look at the household numbers. So
Okay, I was just curious.
it's less than that, but you're right. And that's what we want to see is the DOA will come up with a household projection, then there'll be people per household projection. And so sometimes you can use a people per household projection and then extrapolate that over the population numbers.
Sure.
So, but yes, you're right. Even on an optimistic situation, 445 households would be a lot. But in 25 years, if you did 40 households in 1 year, I mean, that's, it's not I don't want to say unrealistic, but it would be a lot of houses. So, And then, yeah, if you guys see anything else that, and when we're going through this, these are draft chapters, and so we're some of these things will be tweaked as we go, but I appreciate any comments that you have. Age distribution, this is probably more concerning than, other, the actual population projection, just because we're starting to get an older population. So a population pyramid is intended to have fewer older people and a lot more younger people that support, the older people in this. And as you start to see between the 2000 age distribution and the 2020 age distribution, we're starting to see it more rectangular versus a pyramid or a triangle. And that's a little bit of a concern. The positive side is there's still growth at the 5 to 9 years of age. Some of the younger cohorts are still adding people, so that's a good thing. And the older people are still around, which is also a good thing. You still want that, but having that change in shape a little bit is a little bit of a concern, just because you need that next generation to help pay for those services and those workers and stuff to fill those jobs and that are coming. So it's again, that's what this is an actual distribution of what the census is. This isn't a projection. We aren't able to project that out, but I think, that's just something to be mindful of, when we're going through that. And then, education, so one of the surprising numbers is ninth and 12th grade education, but no diploma had increased quite a bit, which was surprising, but there are also bachelor's degrees and graduate or professional degrees did also increase by a lot. So you're becoming generally a more educated population, which is always a positive thing. And then to correlate with that, you have your incomes. Your incomes are rising pretty steadily. If you look at, sorry, I'm not keeping up on this thing. This was the. And you're right, Matt. I can't read that from here either. Education levels. So those are good, increasing. And then this is the household income numbers, and then the median income. So that's gone up quite a bit in just since between 2012 and 2023. And so you'll notice there's sometimes we have numbers that are based on 2020 data, and then there's sometimes 20 odd years. And so we're trying to find, when you're looking at trends, so we use kind of the census data, but when we're trying to look at real numbers, we want to use the more recent numbers. And so like the 2023 numbers come from the American Community Survey. It's also done by the U.S. Census Bureau, but they do a 5-year average. So it's not, it's not an actual like surveyed number, but it's a 5-year average number. Well, I shouldn't say it's not a survey number, but it's not a hard number, it's an average. And so we try to use those in certain instances. So we'll use like the 2023 data because that's the most recent data. So in December of 2025, they'll release the 2024 data. So it's always a year or two behind, but that's the best available data that we can have access to. So in addition to the income levels going up, another thing we look at is the employment characteristics, and so it did seem interesting. The 2,000 occupations that were the highest were management, professional and related, and production, transportation, and material moving, and then sales, office occupations. But in 2020, the service occupations moved into the second place there. It was the second highest number of occupations in 2020. So that was just a little shift in the occupations that are in the community. Well, it's actually not necessarily the community, the people that are in the community, what they're employed with. So they could be working in the cities, and some of these jobs would be in the Twin Cities or in River Falls if they're commuting and stuff. So essentially that's kind of the gist of it. There's not really, if there were items in this survey that we could pull from that we could add to this chapter, but that's really you're just really looking at the base demographics for the community in this first chapter.
Are there numbers that we're going to be that we're lacking in these other areas too, besides demographics? Is there numbers that are due to us from the DOA that would give us a better feel for this, or is this the most recent that we're gonna get and the most accurate? that we
Yeah,
have?
this is the most recent, other than the household numbers.
Okay.
That's really what we're waiting on for the DOA. There might be some other census numbers, but this kind of is consistent with what your last comprehensive plan had for data, and this is matching what's required to be in the statutes for your plan. So there could be other things that we could look at if there were other data sources. Sometimes regional planning has some good data. Sometimes the counties do. But I mean, this is the data source is usually the Census Bureau that we look at. And, when we get, there'll be a chapter called, economic development. And so if there's stuff that's more specific in the occupations or industries and stuff like that, we might be able to get some of that from, whether the chamber has that or different resources. But so this is just kind of like the overall demographics. We'll get into some of those more details when we get into some of those other chapters. All right. But yeah, once we get, and I don't know, I can follow back up with the DOA. I probably have to for other communities, is just seeing when they're on task to get those household numbers back, because those will be important. And again, we'll probably be looking at updating or doing something ourselves, but we want to use some kind of numbers to base those our numbers off of. So the next chapter, to be honest, when you're in a more of an urban area like a city, there's not a ton of changes. We had this chapter drafted 10 years ago, so we looked at a few things, but for the most part, a lot of this didn't change a ton. What we'll want to do a deeper dive into is the goals, objectives, and policies at the end of the chapter. Again, that's a lot of this stuff in the front end is really just data collection. What are the existing conditions and things like that. And so when you're looking at a lot of these natural resources, other than like probably the tree canopy and the emerald ash borer and maybe some farmland, a lot of these things stay the same. Soils haven't changed. Groundwater, unless there's some noticeable groundwater issues, that stays the same. Surface water generally, things like that. There's not a whole lot of changes from 10 years, every 10 years. So. But we did update the mapping. So the mapping is probably one thing we could spend a little bit of time on as far as discussing, just to see do you like what we're doing with the mapping. Some communities, and in this case we put together one environmentally sensitive area map and use it in multiple sections. So you've got your surface waters on there, you've got your steep slopes on there, you've got your wetlands on there, and the floodplains on there. Because of the way the city works out and the way those natural resources are, they're all pretty visible on one map. And so you can break those out and have one map for each, or you can put them all together, and we put them all together. So we can take a look at it tonight. Certainly interested in your opinion if we want to split out some of those things. But we always like to do an environmentally sensitive map, resources map, just because that helps illustrate those things all together. So. And I touch on that. So if we look at, page 3-2, that was, you mentioned it in the survey. We, even before I got a chance to. So the forested lands and urban trees, we're talking about the emerald ash borer. We all know that that's a problem. And but I think when we get to the end of this chapter, we'll talk a little bit about what opportunities there are to address those concerns with the tree canopy, the species diversity and things like that, so don't have a monoculture of trees that can get wiped out. I have a park where I'm from. It's a beautiful big 40-acre park right in the middle of town, and it's pretty bare right now because they had to go through and take out all the ash trees. I think it looks kind of neat because you never were able to see across it. Now you can it's opportunities for more trails and stuff like that, but it's still kind of like it's unfortunate, just because there were so many ash trees in there. But so just going through a couple of the threatened and endangered species, they really kind of, we have a list of all those threatened and endangered species that are in basically it's in the section in town by square mile, but I didn't list them all. There's like 37 or something like that on here, or 27 occurrences. They don't let you know where those are because they don't want people disturbing those things. So we used to have a little bit more, I think, a little bit closer idea of where those things were located. But if you're gonna do a major project, you're gonna probably do an environmental impact statement, you're gonna do a wetland delineation, you're gonna do all those things to try to, archaeological survey. Not every project requires that, but you could incorporate some of those things if you were concerned about some of those resources being threatened further. Here, I'm just a little bit behind here. So environmentally sensitive resources, yeah, surface waters, obviously, those are the main things that you see. And then to go with that, the floodplains, we have a little bit improved image from the DNR on here, and a little better illustration of what the floodplain is, or from the FEMA, I should say, not DNR. Wetlands on the map, there were surprisingly a few wetlands, I thought, for a city your size, and I don't know if you come across that a lot, Matt, in your plan reviews and stuff, if you get a lot of wetlands, but there didn't seem to be a lot that were mapped already, so.
We don't have a lot of them, no, that we come across.
Yeah, so, and topography, just kind of an interesting tidbit, looking at the elevation changes, you have 679 feet above sea level is the lowest point along the river, it looks to be, and then 940 feet above sea level in the northeast corner of the city. So pretty good elevation change, and you know that, you got some nice coulees and bluffs area along the river, so. Slopes, there was actually obviously a good chunk of the city has a 12% slope or greater. Generally, that's the number that you look at, which makes development challenging. In some communities, just outright prohibit development over that slope. It just becomes more erosion, more stormwater runoff, and other development issues, soil stability, and things like that. So those are things that you could incorporate into whether it's your zoning code or your subdivision code if there were limitations on the types of development in steeper slope areas. This was a carryover from your previous code, but our previous comprehensive plan, and I liked it. But it just city landscaping, tree planting, and edible landscapes. So just things like that incorporate, into either parks or new development projects and things like that. Parks, open space, and recreational resources. That is something that we can either tackle in this chapter. It's an option, so there's not a lot of optional things in statute, but it says you may include, X, Y, Z, and that's one of those things that you can include in this chapter. But you're required to include parks and other things in your community and utility facilities chapter. So I was like, well, why would we do it both? And I've done it in both, just to, in the past. But I think you can just refer to either that chapter, but also, a lot of those things are addressed in your comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, which was updated recently. So
We do have one of those?
you do have one, yep, just in January.
CORP, okay.
Yep. So you do have one of those, and then metallic, non-metallic mining resources. I don't know, Matt, I meant to ask you if you guys have permits taken out for that at the city level.
Do not.
So one of the things that's required by state law when we get to the point of having a public hearing is we have to notify any permit holders or anybody that has a marketable deposit of non-metallic mining rights. And so those should be either at the city level or they should be recorded with the county. If we don't have any at the city, maybe that'll, that kind of saves us a little bit of time. But we'll still do a little due diligence to make sure. But and I think you have a non-metallic mining ordinance, do you not? No? All right.
We might, and to be honest, I've never had to deal with it because we never had any
Right.
mining, so it might be in there that I just don't remember.
That was a reference from our last plan, so unless you got rid of it, I would presume that you'd still have it, but we'll double check on that. So, and then cultural logical resources. The state of Wisconsin, the Historical Society, does a nice job of inventorying a lot of the resources that are available. I did this search and I only came up with 2 in Prescott. In your old plan, there showed like there was like 45 of them or something like that. So I don't know if there was a different inventory list. I'll have to go back and see what the source was for that because I want to be accurate. But I need to double check that. But I didn't know if anybody here had any experience in some. It looked like in the 70s and 80s there was some effort to like inventory all the different, whether it's architecture or different things like that. I have not been able to find that source. So if we could find it, I think it would be really cool to talk about that a little bit here. But
I think you should talk to Dallas Eggers about that. He's well into that on the
Okay.
inventory.
do you have
He'd
his
be
phone?
happy
You know
to
what that is?
supply you with
All right.
things on that.
No, this is great.
I really doubt that the only two that we had on that was the 1991 bridge that went down on St. Mary's Catholic Rectory. Seems to me like we had some houses in town that were on the inventory.
Yeah, and there might,
There were.
Sure they
and
were.
I believe it, and I was
Yeah.
surprised because, I.
Buildings also, we ran into a lot of stuff where we were gonna, I remember way back when, there were times when we were thinking about tearing things down and they were on the inventory list.
Sure.
You know, I know there were.
Yeah, and maybe I need to call the Historical Society, there's
Yeah.
contacts there, but I was surprised, I did the search probably 4 times, and I'm like, 2? Like, what? That just didn't seem right to me, so, we'll double check that and try to get that cleaned up a little bit. Community design, so this is something that is required by statute. I don't know that it's really, a lot of communities do a lot with it. So it's more of like a mission statement, I think, in some cases, and this is, I think, I'm trying to think of where I got this from, but just something to look at and think about. Is this really the direction we want to go in general? We don't, again, it's more of like a goal or mission statement in the comprehensive plan. I don't know if it means anything, but it's something that we have to have some aspect of community design in the plan, or should have that.
So whose lap does that fall into?
Well, it'd be either the plan commission, or if there's somebody else that you want to direct or say, hey, we should talk about this a little bit more. If you just want to read the statement quick, it's the City of Prescott's community design focuses on maintaining its river city presence with an emphasis on its historic charm while accommodating modern needs. The plan emphasizes walking neighborhoods, accessible public amenities, and the preservation of architectural heritage. Efforts include promoting or improving connectivity between neighborhoods and commercial areas and promoting sustainable building practices. So,
Good statement.
what's that?
That's a pretty good statement.
Yeah, if we come back and finish the plan and you said, hey, we did that, we did pretty good. If we come back and say, you know what, the plan doesn't do that and we want it to do that, then we need to rework some things. So if you guys like that statement, or if we want to tweak it down the road, we certainly can, but we'll make a note to come back to that. And for some reason, it's in this chapter, but it kind of goes along with cultural resources. Next section is the agricultural resources. There's a lot of prime farmland, and that's really based on soils types. And so there's a lot of prime farmland in the city. It's approximately 67%. Some of that is if properly drained, and so it's just kind of, there's caveats to it, but I don't want to get into kind of too cute with it. So just that it's a notable resource. Some communities maybe take more efforts to protect that than others, but it really depends. If you're kind of landlocked along large farms already, maybe that's, the area where you see development growth happening. Especially if you're having issues with nitrates or other, conflicting land uses. Having those types of, if you have heavy, big farming operations near your wells, there's a wellhead protection ordinance that's in place to try to protect some of that too. But it's something that we wanted to identify and note, that there is a lot of it in the community. And then the last section is, one of your requirements is to include a list of programs. So we've got a list of programs. A lot of it is agricultural related. We don't have to include all of those, but it really depends on the focus, and we'll get into that when we get into the goals, objectives, and policies a little more. But some of the programs include DNR programs, and Prescott has actually been very fortunate. You guys are very successful in getting grants. I think you're probably one of our communities that get more grants than I think, which is great. And so there's just been a lot of opportunities, and it's something to be proud of. And you've got some great leadership here at the city to help you get those grants and to use those dollars. A lot of projects wouldn't happen without those grants.
Just to be fair too, a lot of the reasons we get those grants are also because of Cedar Corporation. I think of all the grants
we've gotten, there's only one that we haven't used Cedar Corporation, or two, we haven't used Cedar Corporation to assist us in getting, so.
Well, thank you, Matt. But yeah, just having a great team at the city too, it just makes it our job easier. And so, yeah, some cool projects that we've done, we've gotten grants for, and some other ones we're working on. So there's just, but we keep a lot of, you have to have good projects to get good, to get the grants too. So if you didn't have worthwhile projects, they're not going to fund you. So yeah, there's just a listing of grants. And like I said, many of them the city is already very familiar with. So the next section is really the goals, objectives, and policies, and these are really ones that were in your past plan. So I didn't go through and update these because I really wanted to have a conversation. And Matt had talked about the survey results and things like that have I think we can utilize. And so I don't want to I just want to kind of point these out. And so typically I think the process that I think works really well is when we reconvene next time, we'll look at these in a little more detail, give you guys a chance to, now we've gone through the chapter a little bit, you understand a little bit of what we're looking at for these goals, objectives, and policies. Take a look at these things and then see which ones either are, still relevant, maybe something we're missing if we're talking about some of the tree thing. I think we do have some things in the trees on here a little bit, but, and this is really going to be, like I said a couple times already, this is the meat of your plan. And more than likely when you pick up your plan, you're not going to go back and look at all of the existing the existing inventory we've taken. Maybe the demographics you'll look at, the population projections you will for sure, but other than that, these goals, objectives, and policies are like when you look to change an ordinance, or when you look at a development plan, you're going to have an opportunity to go through these and say, well, does this fit? Does this, when we sat down over the course of 8 months or whatever in 2025, and we said this is what we want in our community, and you get a development project coming in there, whether it's a subdivision or a retailer or a mixed-use development, and say, this is not really on our plan. Should we really consider this? You'll have some basis to either have them tweak it, maybe deny it, but at least you have some basis for what you're going to approve. And so it's important to look at these things. And then also when you're doing code amendments, you just did a code amendment or recommended a code amendment tonight. That was a statutory requirement, but there are probably periodically there are going to be code amendments. There could be amendments to your subdivision ordinance. And so these things are important to look at. And again, we don't have a perfect, we don't know exactly how things are going to be in the next 10, 20 years. This is a 20-year plan, but it does have to be updated every 10 years. So that's what the state requires. And so it's a matter of like doing our best guess based on, but that's, when we build, like I said, we build on each chapter. You look at what's, the existing resources, you look at what's, you hope to see going forward, and that's why we develop these goals, objectives, and policies. So I will stop there, unless you have any further questions.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So as we're doing this, as we're doing the updates, when do we hear from you again? When are you back?
I'll be back every month.
Okay, so as we get this with the content in this month's packet,
Yep.
and we grow on that for the next, what'd you say, 8 months?
Give or take, yeah, depending
Okay.
on how long it takes to get through.
So is it something that, is this something that's out to the public, Matt? Is this, not that there are some people that maybe might want to take a look at this? I mean, it's raw, it hasn't been adjusted, or we haven't done anything to it, but is this going out to the public? Can they,
It's in the plan commission packet, and those are all on our website.
okay, all right.
Otherwise, we can put draft plans on our webpage, or if they want like specific breakdowns.
Survey results and everything are out there, they're gonna
The
see
survey
same
results
thing.
will probably, once the survey closes, we'll put together the results into a PDF, and we'll actually post
Okay.
that, once we get a chance to show it all to council as well.
And we can handle the survey a couple different ways. We could go over those results at the May meeting, if it was ready, the results were available. Or we could take, because the survey is broken down by chapter, essentially. It's to align itself with the different elements in the comp plan. So we could each month, we could start out with, here were the results of the survey, or, and you guys will get them ahead of time. But I don't know what you prefer, how you prefer to digest that, if you want the whole survey in one, packet, and then you bring that packet with you and we talk about just those chapters each month.
Are we pleased with the number of respondents on that and with the feedback we're getting?
I mean, I would have loved to get 10% of the community, that'd be over 400 people. So, I mean, I guess wish in one hand and I don't.
What are you at right now, Matt?
We're at 160 right now with another week and we've had it open for, it'll be over a month and a half.
And just to reiterate, it's open until the 12th, it's open until Saturday or
Yep,
Sunday?
Saturday.
Okay, so anybody that wants to get in and fill that out can do that up till then, all right.
Yep, so yeah, we'll be back every month unless, there's something that happens, but that's our plan. Come back every month and talk through this until we get it done.
Okay. Any other questions for it? Okay, Josh, thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the survey map for division of parcel ID 271-01179-0400. Matt?
Thank you, Mayor. So, what before you tonight is the division of about 5.73 acres from the current property owner of Kim Christensen. This is land located off Highway 35. Let me flip this upside down. So basically this overview map what's in your packet. That 5 acres is this area that was highlighted. So basically the cemetery, St. Joe Cemetery is right on the back side here. Highway 35 is to the north. Over here is Public Works, and then Johnson Construction is also there. So one of the things we did discuss as they were looking at breaking this portion off was that essentially when they create this land now, it will be landlocked. So the future portion is to be sold. I do want to make a correction in the packet. It says Coulee River Trails because that's who we've been working with a lot, working with Israel and the group of local people that are working to create that regional trail network. But they partnered with a group called Landmark Conservancy, and they're the ones who have written. I'm looking at Israel, and you can jump in if I'm wrong, Israel, but they partnered and they worked to get the U.S. Forestry grant as well as the Knowles Nelson grant to raise the funds to purchase the other 72.
Yeah, it's around there, about 70.
So
72.6.
the remaining land here will be about 72 this is a good point as we're talking about in our comp plan, the protection of natural resources. That's exactly what the goal is here, is with that 72 acres of land to preserve the coulee, what's called the Pine Coulee area. So that was why the Landmark and Pine Coulee or the Coulee River Trails group worked together along with others to raise these funds and write the grants and ideally get this portion of land for preservation and conservation. But as part of that, before you tonight is the area that's not being purchased, which would be broken off, is that 5.7 acres.
The 5.7 acres is the one that's landlocked, or?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
the one that would not have, it would need some sort of access agreement either with Johnson Construction or eventually with Landmark Conservancy or whoever owns that portion that is to be sold.
Is that
This was
something-
originally in the plans, Israel? This was originally in the plans to, can I reference him? Can I talk to
Yeah,
him?
absolutely.
Yeah. This was originally in the plans, that 5.2 acres to,
Yeah, we had to, in order to qualify for the DNR grant,
yeah,
we had to excise that portion.
okay,
And again, I'm speaking as Coulee River Trails, not as Landmark Conservancy. Landmark Conservancy is handling all the legal details. Landmark Conservancy will own this at the point of acquisition. But that section needed to come off of the property in order to qualify for the DNR Knowles Nelson
Is that right?
Stewardship Grant. Mhm.
okay.
So that's where that piece
This
to
isn't
get
any,
demarcated.
this isn't any surprise to you or anything,
No.
that this was
No,
all in the, all
no,
in the
this
working?
was all part of the negotiations.
Okay.
This is a formality to establish the exact boundaries
Okay,
in order to facilitate the final purchase agreement.
May I ask why they had to remove that 5 acres, 5+ acres?
I could answer that, but I want Landmark to represent that. Yeah, there were some considerations around previous use of that particular parcel.
There used to be a landfill, didn't it?
Must have been.
I think it was, like, years ago.
the dump was
is-
down there, it was close to that, I remember. We
Why
used to shoot
wouldn't
rats
we
down
set the easement before agreeing to do this? I feel like landlocking a lot like that, voting to do so seems interesting. Why wouldn't, I forget the company already, but the company that's setting this up, why wouldn't they just grant easement in this whole thing to allow access to that property for whatever it becomes someday?
Why wouldn't Landmark do it? Well, it's Kim Christensen who owns the property, so it'd really be up to him, and he's the one who's requesting the division. So basically, we said, well, you own the property, and you're the one requesting to essentially landlock your own property, so. That.
Well, it's hard to set those easements up later, that's the problem.
I mean, we do have other properties that have the same thing, but that's up to him, I guess, if he wants to make a condition of sale that he has a shared access agreement with the land he's gonna sell, so any future driveway or access that gets to the property would allow him to put in a driveway to this lot 1. We can, if you're requesting, we could make that a condition of the approval of the CSM.
That's on them, though. You know, it's on the landowner, it's the city doesn't have anything to do with getting you access to your property. If you're requesting that, you know, unless we have a legitimate beef with it, there's no reason why we shouldn't just go forward with it. That'll be for their future. Like you said, you could come in from Johnson Construction or
They would have to
something like
agree to
that
that.
eventually.
They would have to agree to
But
that.
they'd
It's not
have
our business.
to,
Maybe
they'd
they
have to
already
go
have.
get
Maybe
that.
they already have.
But if everybody did this tomorrow, everyone that owns land in Prescott did this tomorrow and locked some part of their property up, we would have half the town not accessible without negotiation. So that's where, like, I thought maybe I'd mention the fact that we should consider seeing if they wanted to add that, but they've obviously already thought about that, I'm sure. But if he lives in Iowa, I've actually met with him a couple times, but well, I can't say it. It might be just left for dead, that property, you know, that's my feeling on it. You know, he doesn't care. He got what he needed out of the other part and type
A
of
lot of
deal.
it's not.
I'm
A
speculating.
lot of it's not buildable.
Yeah, well,
I
I'm
mean, it
sure.
goes down to the railroad on one end. It's behind both cemeteries. Is the
Yeah, I know exactly where
lane
it's
you're
at.
talking about.
I love the idea of it getting purpose the way it's intended, in here. That's great.
Yep.
Like 2 thumbs up. I just get a little cringy at the easement, the landlocking.
What are you looking for? What are you looking for, a motion to?
To send it to council.
I'll make a motion to send it to council like this.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second to send the certified survey map to council for approval. Any discussion on the motion? Not all those in favor say aye.
All right.
All right,
Opposed? Okay, motion carried.
thanks, Israel. Thanks for helping us out with the demographics on the city. You got the other one, that's
So the next item on agenda is other business. Anybody have any other business?
Just to note that our city planner did leave to join the city of Apple Valley, and so we are looking for another city planner. Positions open right now. Other than that, no.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion, a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thanks. Thanks for showing up for your last one, John.